At midnight, I sent my boss a sultry selfie, in a low-cut red dress. My boss replied. 5 minutes earlier, I had sent out 3 videos from my album, and hurried to pack my things to go home. As I left the underground garage, my boss sent a. I scrolled up to check the messages, and discovered that all the videos had failed to send, but the selfie had gone through and couldn't be retracted. Oh no, I'm doomed. I frantically edited a message to explain to my boss. Sorry, the signal was bad earlier, the videos failed to send, and I'm re-uploading them. He read it but didn't reply. Could he think I did it on purpose? Our boss, Alvin Shakespeare, had just returned from Brisbane last week to take over the company. He's young and handsome, the typical dominating CEO type. I sent another message, I'm really sorry. The picture and videos were all in the album list, I didn't mean to mix them up. It wasn't intentional. Still no reply. That selfie was meant for my best friend, she bought me the outfit to help me snag a date. You know, the kind that leaves nothing to the imagination, and highlights all the right curves. Sending such a photo to my boss was definitely a solid way to get fired. I was begging for forgiveness. 5 minutes later, my boss, received the video. Or just the photo. I couldn't sleep that night. The next day, I was called into my boss' office, sporting 2 big bags under my eyes. Jill Croft. The boss leaned against his desk, slowly pronouncing my name. He smiled, reminding me of a junior from back in school, who would pant like a dog while running, yet smiled sweetly. Come in and close the door. Hey. Close the door. Nervous, I stumbled, my heels clicking, and ended up sitting on the low coffee table right at the entrance. Stupidly enough, my thighs were exposed. He looked over at the sound, his profile looking gorgeous. I glanced at him, embarrassed, hurriedly covering myself up, holding onto the doorknob as I stood up. A click. I hadn't meant to lock the door. Sorry, should I open the door? Oh, such a calm question made me think of adult comics. My face turned bright red. I wanted to scream at myself. So there I sat, blushing for what felt like an eternity, until finally, my boss spoke, breaking the tension. But I didn't dare to speak much, just nodded. What kind of sports do you like? He asked, and I just nodded again. Are you feeling okay? He glanced at my flushed face, surprisingly gentle. I shook my head quickly. To avoid him questioning my intellect, I answered, I enjoy planks. Great for muscle endurance. He let out a slight laugh, finding my nonsensical response amusing. I swear he wasn't laughing at me but rather. I tried to act calm, but my palms were sweaty. Could it be? Did someone really just feel charmed by my sexy selfie? Was the domineering CEO trope becoming real? Just when I was submerged in pink bubbles of thought, he asked again. You studied at S University as a defense student. Why did you choose to pursue a master's at B University? I froze, seeing him glance at a document in his hands. Wait, it was my employee file. Oh no, I forgot. This isn't a dating scene, I'm here to report about work. I didn't answer, and he quietly flipped through my file. The more he flipped, the more confident I became. Top school graduate, excellent yearly work performance. I got it, he's going to give me a raise. However, when he closed the file, I felt a splash of cold water on my enthusiasm. He nitpicked, saying my undergraduate major didn't align. Have you visited your alma mater? I mean, S University, Alvin Shakespeare asked. I was a bit lost. Seeing me silent, he sat upright. I heard the small playground in front of the teaching building has been turned into an auditorium. I understood where he was leading but didn't fully grasp it. The small playground. Oh, do you still remember anything about S University? He hesitated, his voice dropping to a captivating tone. I got it. Was he considering a big collaboration project? I understand what you mean. He looked surprised and excited. You really got it. I nodded. How about we schedule a chat before next Wednesday? His expression brightened immediately. It seemed he had something to say but held back in the end. How about Friday at 7 p.m.? Does that work for you? He set a time, picking up other documents, his manner suggesting I couldn't refuse. Why even ask me then? I had no choice but to accept this overtime rule. Friday came and my colleagues left one by one. In a hurry to get home, I took my proposal and headed to Alvin Shakespeare. Half an hour later, We stood facing the neon lights outside, caught in a long silence. What was happening? I finished presenting the proposal, but he stayed impassive. Boss, what do you think of the proposal? I asked humbly. Alvin Shakespeare remained silent. Is it the budget that needs adjustments? Or is the focus not strong enough? Still silence. From our interactions these days, I figured out a bit about him. When he didn't feel like talking, he would simply say nothing. Then his phone rang. Hello, Mr. Alvin Shakespeare, your reservation for 2 at the Green Jasmine restaurant for 7:30 p.m. Please arrive on time. The Green Jasmine restaurant. The go-to dating spot. Boss, are you meeting someone? He glanced at me and coldly replied, cancel it. But that restaurant used a robot for calls, and no one paid attention to him. I tried hard not to laugh, and after a while, he muttered 2 words, off work. Jill Croft. Just 4 days left until the countdown to snag a puppy dog. Just as I got home, I received a voice call from my best friend, Sophia. Haha, today I tried to build the persona of a career-focused woman, yet failed. Forget about getting a puppy dog. Abort mission. Alvin Shakespeare's face was all I could think about. On Sunday, there's a party at Tang Yi Bar. The finance department juniors are coming, they say they're quite good looking. Are you trying to lure me in with false promises again? If you fake news once more, I'll invest in a dating site for you. I imitated Alvin Shakespeare's style, and left her on read. Sophia, hey. The dating package costs 20,000 for a month to find love. A premium gift box for high-quality men. Though I knew this gift box was ridiculous, I felt a twinge of interest. Yet on Sunday, instead of my big prize, I bumped into my boss. Hello everyone, I'm Alvin Shakespeare. My boss, Alvin Shakespeare, in front of our alumni, lacked the typical domineering demeanor he had at work. He seemed much more approachable. With his disciplined aura and refined looks, he quickly became the center of attention. I was dumbfounded. My boss was a junior from my own alma mater. So when he mentioned S University, he was looking to connect with an alumni. And here I was, working late for 3 days, drafting a collaboration proposal for him. No wonder he looked bothered. But if he wasn't interested in the proposal, then what was he wanting to discuss? Before I could untangle my thoughts, someone asked a question, causing Alvin Shakespeare's face to turn bright red, and he answered, single. Sophia nudged me hard and whispered, did you hear that? There are only 2 days left in the countdown to snag the puppy dog plan. If you're still single after this, I'll. She made a gesture as if to kill me. The alumni buzzed with excitement. Someone started cheering and clapping. Alvin Shakespeare raised his glass in response, nodding at everyone. When he turned to look at me, he raised his glass higher, making eye contact, and said, I'm glad to find you here. I nervously fumbled with my drink, feeling like his gaze had stolen my breath. In the bar, groups of people mingled. Alvin Shakespeare approached me, seeming to have something to say. I knew this was called drawing closer through connection. I quickly poured myself a drink. Jill Croft, it's been a while. He flashed that sweet smile again, making me feel warmly welcomed. Thank goodness he didn't put on a, I'm your boss, act at this moment. The clink of our glasses sounded nice, and his polite gaze lingered on me, making me wonder if there was an issue with my dress, but everything seemed fine. The bar was loud, so I leaned in closer, unexpectedly inhaling a deep breath of his scent. He leaned in closer to my ear, seemingly teasingly, that dress suits you beautifully. The dress. He smiled and opened his gallery on his phone, gesturing for me to look. Completely clueless, I leaned in and was instantly caught off guard. He had saved the selfie I mistakenly sent him. The way I posed might not have been that bad, but what was shocking was how my curves were highlighted perfectly, fitting snugly against him. Even worse, the fabric of the dress sparkled under the lights, accentuating all the right spots. I was pressed against him, moving away felt like giving up. As a senior, I had never backed down. Out of nowhere, I found a bottle of wine and said to Alvin Shakespeare, do you like it? If you do, let's drink another bottle. The next day, I woke up in Alvin Shakespeare's big bed, feeling incredibly out of sorts. Last night, I had barely drank half a glass before feeling drunk, and snuggling against his shoulder, refusing to leave. Sophia approached, looking bewildered, but I shot her a look to keep her quiet. In front of everyone, I gave her a hand gesture saying, 525. Jill Croft's 5-week single plan. 2. Only 2 days remaining in the plan countdown. 0. It all started now. My best friend, Sophia, never let me down. Immediately, she arranged for Alvin Shakespeare to drive me home. I didn't slack off either. On the way back to his place, I leaned on him, touched his back, played with his hair, wrapped my arms around his waist, and hooked my legs around him. I used all the tricks I knew, leaving me exhausted. At that moment, I felt completely perplexed. Does it still hurt? Alvin Shakespeare knocked and walked in. I buried my face in his pillow, inhaling his scent, and didn't want to speak. He sat at the edge of the bed, perfectly sober without the slightest hint of alcohol. If your head doesn't hurt anymore, get up. We can't be late for the Monday meeting, he reminded me bluntly. I sat up, feeling almost like I was in a daze. Last night, Alvin Shakespeare had acted like a very disciplined monk. I was completely drained, and yet nothing had happened. When I finally dragged myself to the office, my mind was still filled with questions. Was it that I lacked charm? Or was it that Alvin Shakespeare just wasn't it? I couldn't comprehend. Frustrated, I opened my phone, and noticed the alumni group chat was buzzing. In just the morning, they had started reminiscing about their military training days. I glanced at the photos they shared, the rugged style, lacking any emotion. Under the blazing sun, a group of people lay on the ground like monkeys, their faces distorted. The only one sitting was the instructor, at ease. The instructor for their training that year was me. University had a tradition of having junior defense students guide military training. That year, I was the trainer, or rather, their nightmare. Planks are good for muscle endurance. If I don't yell stop, you're not allowed to stop. That was my famous saying back then. As soon as the photo was posted, my junior brothers flooded the group chat with their comments. Your sister's waist isn't a waist, it's just a plank torture. Your sister's legs aren't legs, standing at attention is a no-go. My reputation plummeted. Someone tagged me directly, at Jill Croft, not, sister, look at what damage you've caused over the years. I stared at the screen, trying to think of a way to roast them back. As I stared, something suddenly felt off. Alvin Shakespeare. Wow, Alvin Shakespeare is actually one of my juniors. Ugh, unless Alvin Shakespeare is blind, how could he possibly have a crush on his own tyrant instructor? Looking at my waist, my hips, my legs, it certainly doesn't feel like a heartbeat racing, more like muscle soreness. Before I could finish crying, I saw Alvin Shakespeare replying in the group, thanks everyone, but my heart belongs to someone. I quickly scrolled to the top and realized they were going through a list of potential matches for him. With so many well-qualified girls, he hadn't looked twice at any of them. Moreover, he said he was single last night, and today he already has someone in his heart. Could it be me? No, I almost stripped down in front of him last night, and he didn't bat an eye. Alvin Shakespeare wasn't lying. Being single and having a crush are two completely different things. What kind of girl does he like anyway? As I thought about it, my meal suddenly lost its flavor. A week later, at a restaurant in City D, during this business trip, I had been negotiating contract details over dinner instead of presenting the project myself. I should have never come on this trip, but I didn't know how to face Alvin Shakespeare after my embarrassing moment. So, this past week, I either was on a business trip, or on the way to one. In the midst of all this, I also heard some gossip about Alvin Shakespeare. It said his crush is the daughter of a certain corporation. Their families have known each other for generations. They plan to date for 2 years after returning home, and then get married. I sighed and opened another bottle. The clients looked utterly daunted. Suddenly, the door swung open. Without even turning around, I ordered, "Waiter, bring 2 more bottles." No one paid any attention to me. I shook the half-empty bottle, then turned around. Alvin Shakespeare was standing at the door. My instincts told me to avoid his gaze, but thinking it over, I quickly placed the bottle back on the table. The clients knew Alvin Shakespeare, and immediately invited him to join us. He didn't decline, sitting down and saying, "I happen to be in the neighboring private room, so I came to see you." Then, he mistook my motion of placing the bottle down for grabbing it, and after a pause, said, "I won't drink." Everyone on the table nodded in agreement. I stood in the corner, trying to sneak out a few empty bottles from the table. Of all times, Alvin Shakespeare's gaze swept over the empty wine bottles, then landed on the row of wine glasses in front of me. He fell silent. It's over. I was caught pretending to have a low tolerance for alcohol in front of him today. Last time I pretended to be drunk. I may have taken advantage of his kindness. I could act recklessly after drinking. But how should I explain it now? Guilty of lust, uncontrolled instincts. I glanced at him discreetly, unable to decipher his expression. He must be very angry now that he knows I was lying. Alvin Shakespeare still drove me back to my hotel. I followed behind him, afraid to get too close, not wanting to create a misunderstanding. But I couldn't stray too far away either, since I felt genuinely dizzy this time. Watching his tall silhouette made my mind wander to places it shouldn't. If he didn't have someone he liked, I would just pull him in at the hotel and kiss him passionately, then wait for him. They say, a girl chasing a guy is like a thin layer of gauze. If the first time fails, there's always a second. But I really didn't dare. It's too risky. I shook my head vigorously. Do you have a headache? Alvin Shakespeare asked, glancing back at me. I flushed red, unable to find the words. Finally, under his gaze, I shyly nodded. He didn't speak further, but lifted his hand to steady me at the shoulder and continued walking. With him so close, I really wanted to lean against him, but thinking how expressionless he looked, my desire faded, and I didn't dare to. The hotel I was staying at wasn't far, but the ground felt like cotton under my feet, and it seemed to shift. After much hesitation, I mustered the courage to pull on Alvin Shakespeare's sleeve. He paused, deliberately slowing his pace. This time, Alvin Shakespeare only walked me to the door of my room before leaving. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but to say my heart didn't feel disappointed would be a lie. 2 days later, I received a call summoning me back from City D. It was Alvin Shakespeare's assistant, saying I needed to return to the office to sign some documents. But anyone could see signing was just an excuse. They were truly removing the projects from me. What's going on? Am I being fired? I looked at the documents the assistant had brought, struggling to process it. The assistant seemed uncomfortable but just said it was Alvin Shakespeare's instructions. I skimmed the document again. I recognized the words, but the overall meaning was beyond me. Why the sudden changes? Was it because my FAADE of low alcohol tolerance was exposed? Is it really that serious? No. I needed to find a time to talk to Alvin Shakespeare. Love can be set aside, but I absolutely can't lose my job. However, just as I was preparing to have that discussion with him, a pure-looking young lady appeared at the door to Alvin Shakespeare's office before me. Isn't she the daughter of that corporation? Alvin Shakespeare's crush. I looked at the time, rolled my eyes. They're dating in the office even before the workday was over. I considered leaving but then remembered something. That night at the bar, I had slipped a little card somewhere in the backseat of Alvin Shakespeare's car. Thinking I had everything under control that night, I had preemptively sounded the horn of victory on that card, writing 3 big words, I'm not drunk. I even carelessly stamped it with a lipstick mark. If the future boss lady sees that, I don't know what my fate will be. I will definitely lose my job. I found an excuse and asked the assistant for Alvin Shakespeare's car keys, then hurried to the parking lot. Alvin Shakespeare's car frequently parked in the same spot. It was easy to remember. I opened the door, half kneeling to look for it inside, executing the motion smoothly. The card was still in the same spot, indicating Alvin Shakespeare hadn't seen it. I breathed a sigh of relief, reached out and grabbed it, clutching it tightly in my palm. What are you doing? Alvin Shakespeare asked from behind me. I quickly backed out, looking ungraceful. Beside him stood the young lady, and it would be bad if he misunderstood. I thought quickly, good to see you, Alvin Shakespeare. Today, my assistant said I should drive. Just adjusting your seat back here. When I locked eyes with Alvin Shakespeare, I wanted to die. What a fool. What seat back in the back seat can be adjusted? After a long pause, I stood very straight. Alvin Shakespeare glanced at me, and then at the young lady beside him. He ignored both of us and sat in the car. I was confused. Alvin Shakespeare, take her to Maple Forest Road. I nodded, and before I could say, okay, the young lady interrupted. No need. Drop me off at the west gate of Yushi Villa. I started the car and hit the road. The young lady continued chatting with Alvin Shakespeare. In the rearview mirror, Alvin Shakespeare's eyes were closed, feigning sleep and looking quite impatient. Even a pig could see he wasn't interested in her. The young lady continued chattering about their families. I finally understood. It turns out her parents wanted to match her with Alvin Shakespeare, even starting to plan for their future. The current plan is for her parents to invest in Alvin Shakespeare's family company. However, the disparity in their family backgrounds was significant. Instead of investment, it could be likened to acquisition. And all this seemed to have never considered Alvin Shakespeare's feelings, like a benefactor, never asking others if they want it. Anyone with ambition wouldn't want to accept this kind of condescension, let alone Alvin Shakespeare's company isn't desperate for help. The young lady continued to chatter. After the nth time Alvin Shakespeare frowned. I stopped the car, interrupting her. Miss, we've arrived. Be careful getting out. But she didn't want to hear me and sneered. Who do you think you are to interrupt? I glanced back at Alvin Shakespeare, calmly replying, I'm an employee of Alvin Shakespeare. She didn't expect me to retort. An employee with such bad manners shouldn't be retained. Any money my father invests will go to waste. So arrogant. Our company's rules are to work hard, be dedicated, and ensure that the boss isn't reduced to being at the mercy of a rich woman due to poor performance. How could we lack rules? I invoked Alvin Shakespeare's name, my face expressing loyalty and dedication. This was my moment of success or failure. If Alvin Shakespeare could arbitrarily fire me based solely on her words, then I had no reason to stay. The young lady seemed unconvinced and was about to continue her tirade. Alvin Shakespeare exited the car and walked toward the front. My heart trembled. Did I just mess it up? Jill Croft. Alvin Shakespeare called my name as he sat in the passenger seat. Then he said a sentence that shocked both women. No more arguing. Let's go home. I bought you new lingerie. I turned around and instinctively asked, what kind of lingerie? Black lace. He was about to say more when I hurriedly leaned in and covered his mouth. The scale is too much. I want my dignity. You. The pretty girl slammed the car door behind her and stormed off in a fit of anger. The sound of her high heels hitting the ground echoed chillingly even from a distance. Boss, I didn't expect you could be so infuriating when you're in a mood, I said, grinning like a rogue as I watched her leave. For quite a while, Alvin Shakespeare didn't say a word. I turned to him, and realized I had covered his mouth tightly. Seeing Alvin Shakespeare up close, I suddenly remembered a face from military training years ago. There was a tall and thin boy who performed well, but always seemed to walk awkwardly. I taught him diligently, punishing him to run laps on the playground. He was out of breath but still managed a sweet smile. He stood at the back of the line, and a few times I intentionally sat on him, timing him while saying, don't stop until I say so. Holding a plank is good for muscle endurance. That boy was Alvin Shakespeare. I silently unbuckled my seatbelt, wanting to escape. Where are you going? Alvin Shakespeare yanked me back. Home. Aren't you my driver? I'm not home yet. Reluctantly, I sat back in the driver's seat to take him home. However, when I tried to leave after completing my task, he wouldn't let me. With a stubborn resolve, I followed him inside, feeling awkward as I sat on the sofa, especially when I recalled what happened that night and that I had once tormented Alvin Shakespeare. Awkwardness piled upon awkwardness, doubling my discomfort. Alvin Shakespeare poured me a glass of water, and I dared not meet his gaze. A voice echoed in my mind, you tormented him, and now you want to seduce him, only to fail in the end. Help! What a cruel reality this is. This is for you, Alvin Shakespeare said as he handed me a gift box from the bedroom. I lifted it, feeling how light it was. What could it be? Open it and see, he said, his tone seemingly eager. With suspicion, I tore open the wrapping and revealed two soft black straps and lace. Lingerie. I looked at him in disbelief as I pulled everything out. The tag fell onto my lap. 70D. It's my size. Here, let me help you try it on, Alvin Shakespeare said, reaching for it. My mind went blank as I handed it to him obediently. He wants to try it on for me. What is happening? In the next moment, he drew the curtains, sat behind me, and his hand reached for the zipper of my dress. He pulled it down. What are you doing? I quickly grabbed his wrist, holding it tightly. He looked innocent. But didn't you say? I was speechless. Yes, I did say I needed to get lingerie, but that was to provoke her, wasn't it? In his eyes, I saw my own foolishness reflected. You had already bought it, didn't you? He nodded. I lost my composure. I thought he was a reserved boss, but it turns out he's a lecherous one. The more I thought, the angrier I became. Alvin Shakespeare. He tilted his head at me, feigning innocence, but now, that face looked like a refined pervert in my eyes. I came to see you today to discuss something. He nodded, his gaze drifting to the black lace lingerie. What a beast in a suit. No, this isn't what you think. After a moment, I lowered my voice and restrained myself, asking him, after I sent you flirty selfies and pretended to be drunk, do you see me as someone easy? He didn't reply. No answer is a tacit agreement. I exploded. So you called me over, thinking you could grant me a favor. He obviously froze. I shot him a glare, clearly upset. I thought you were an honorable man, but it turns out you were plotting this all along. The more I spoke, the angrier I became. Seeing him silent, I pressed on. What else do you have to say? It seemed like Alvin Shakespeare finally got the chance to speak, his tone plaintive. But you said you wanted me to. What did I want from you? You asked me to buy you, last time. My pride flared up as I said, do you want to argue? Bring it on. I've never lost a fight. It felt like I was back to scolding others again. Alvin Shakespeare. Holding the lingerie, I adopted a commanding tone. Come here, show me how I asked you for this thing last time. My indignation fueled my resolve. All right then. Alvin Shakespeare hadn't spoken until then, his voice sounding hoarse. Normally, when a bossy woman gets angry, everyone would retreat, but this time, Alvin Shakespeare simply walked toward me. He wrapped his arm around my waist and lifted me, heading toward the big bed in the bedroom. I felt lost as he carried me away in my anger. When I regained focus, Alvin Shakespeare was blushing and gazing into my eyes. What is he about to do? I couldn't give in easily, curling my body to roll to the other side of the bed. Seeing this, he knelt beside me. What are you doing? I shouted defiantly, but my voice came out more like a plea, demonstrating. He actually lowered his voice to tease me. I glared at him, only noticing his flushed earlobe and a bit of his neck. Alvin Shakespeare leaned in close, whispering in my ear, last time you wanted me to buy you new ones, saying they were expensive. I suddenly remembered. That night, while I pretended to be drunk, the lace lingerie snagged on his zipper, and the more I struggled, the more it tore. In the end, he held me down, and tore the snagged part free. I cursed under my breath. Damn, the most expensive one got damaged by you. Buy me a new one. He didn't respond at the time, just draped his shirt over me and left, leaving me flustered. Now, Alvin Shakespeare picked up the new one beside me, tilting his head to look at me. Jill Croft, do you like it? He flustered me once more, but he wouldn't let me speak and promptly captured my mouth with his. I reacted a moment too late, letting Alvin Shakespeare's breath envelop me, and all that filled my mind was, Alvin Shakespeare is seeking revenge. Back on S University's little playground, Alvin Shakespeare, nearly exhausted, was biting through the final 10 seconds, and I plopped down on him. After slowly giving my long speech, I stopped the timer and added another minute. Someone in the line remarked that my action was ruthless, and I leaned down, close to Alvin Shakespeare, asking, Junior, he spoke without permission, I'll add another minute just for you, like it. And on the track, he was punished to run the playground for walking awkwardly with both feet moving together. On the last lap, I asked him beside me, 3 more laps, like it. It was understandable that Alvin Shakespeare would hold a grudge. I remembered when we first lined up for class divisions. He stood there, fair and slender, his features delicate enough to be mistaken for a girl. After staring for a while, I yelled, the tall girl in the back, step forward, this is a boys' class. Even though Alvin Shakespeare eventually got tanned enough that his features were unrecognizable, he would still be teased for that moment in line. My actions had indeed crossed the line, so he stopped me to strike back. By rejecting me and flirting with me at the same time, he intended to retaliate. Sensing my discomfort, Alvin Shakespeare withdrew his hand from the back of my head, and realized my resolute expression. Got what you wanted. I slipped out of his embrace, biting my lip as I looked at him. Who told me to wrong him back then? I should apologize. Alvin Shakespeare didn't speak for a moment, then shook his head. You still haven't agreed to my request. Agreed to what? To publicly apologize, or to resign voluntarily. Is this kid trying to ruin my career? That's harsh. He smiled. No rush, Jill Croft. Let's eat first, and we'll talk after. I understood. He wanted me to stay by his side, and torment me bit by bit. During dinner, Alvin Shakespeare noticed I wasn't eating well. Not to your taste. Next time we can go somewhere else. There's a Chinese restaurant by the river with great flavors. Do you like it? When he didn't speak, it was fine. But once he mentioned this, all I wanted was to apologize. Alvin Shakespeare, I'm sorry. I actually want to tell you. Nervously, I set down my chopsticks, preparing for martyrdom. He lowered his eyes and waved his hand gently. Jill Croft, don't rush. Have a little cake first. Take your time. Take your time. Oh no. This was too tortuous. Every time I felt a spark of affection for him, he would trigger his revenge mode, like it. In that instant, I recalled the little playground, silently protesting my cruel actions from back then. Alvin Shakespeare came close to whisper, like it. Don't you think? Who could like someone like you? A killer of dreams. So just like that, I spent a week enduring Alvin Shakespeare's torment. I asked him why he wouldn't let me continue overseeing the D-City project. He told me it was because he didn't want me drinking, worried I might get a headache if I got drunk. So he was still holding that against me, from when I pretended to be drunk. In truth, most of his retribution came from emotional matters. Recently, he had been especially nice to me, so sweet I almost thought he had fallen for me. But every time I reached that conclusion, a blow would come just in time. Jill Croft, do you like it? Who could withstand that? Later, just as the year-end company affairs became busy, Alvin Shakespeare frequently traveled for business, and I found myself feeling quite free. But good times didn't last long. On New Year's Day, I received a package from Alvin Shakespeare, a beautiful bouquet of red roses. There was also a card inside, and without needing to guess, it was that same phrase, do you like it? Sure enough, Alvin Shakespeare sent me a new message, Jill Croft. I see the package has been signed for. Open it and see. Do you like it? I stared at the vibrant red roses, my mind drifting back to a few years ago. In my last year at S University, I was surrounded by a crowd and led to the lakeside, where a handsome junior was waiting for me with a smile. I smiled back, thinking sweet love had finally come to me. But when I took the roses from his hand, laughter erupted around me. I felt a bit embarrassed, but mostly unjustly treated. Sis, you've been fooled. A guy laughed as he ran into the crowd. I was surrounded by them, experiencing an unforgettable April Fool's Day. Back then, they said red roses weren't suitable for a demoness like me. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my hand. I had pricked myself on a rose thorn. I was wrong. I didn't want to live like this for another day. I carefully considered my words, and composed an apology text to Alvin Shakespeare. Alvin Shakespeare, I was wrong in the past. Please forgive me. His response was, Jill Croft, what's wrong? Where is this coming from? In despair, I shut off my phone. After thinking for a moment, I understood. Was this an opportunity for me to confess in person? When are you home? I want to talk face to face. I'm almost there. I was taken aback. 5 minutes later, Alvin Shakespeare appeared at my door. He wasn't wearing a business suit. Instead, he had on a casual hoodie that gave him a more down-to-earth vibe. I had been blind back then. I really shouldn't have. Alvin Shakespeare, my actions back then weren't aimed at you. You may look slim, but you've got muscle under those clothes. What I wanted to convey was that I mistook him for a girl solely because he was too attractive. I misunderstood him, not solely because he was thin, but I didn't dare say that outright. Alvin Shakespeare sat on the sofa, looking down at his hoodie and instinctively touching his chest. He blushed, definitely because I embarrassed him. I quickly added, but that's not all. I shouldn't have punished you. I owe you an apology. I bowed deeply, genuinely remorseful. Alvin Shakespeare frowned, momentarily taken aback, then smiled. Be careful not to expose yourself, Jill Croft. I stood up straight in silence, a wave of exasperation rushing through my mind. Could I get angry? Could I hit him? Sure, unless I wanted to kiss my year-end bonus goodbye. Weighing the pros and cons, I turned submissive and gentle. Could you stop holding a grudge against me? Alvin Shakespeare gestured for me to sit beside him, and I complied eagerly. He asked, "Do you like me?" Of course, at this point, I would agree with whatever he said. By the time I realized what I was saying, Alvin Shakespeare had a sweet smile on his face. I fell for it. The night draped into the room from the window, and I couldn't see Alvin Shakespeare's expression. Suddenly, he wrapped his arm around my shoulder, and I froze. In an instant, his lips touched mine. "Do you forgive me?" I asked. "Jill Croft, when have I ever held a grudge against you?" I was confused. Alvin Shakespeare sighed. "I like you too much to hold a grudge." I totally didn't expect this plot twist. Help! Alvin Shakespeare likes me, who would dare believe that? In my disbelief, he leaned in closer and kissed me again. Half an hour later, Alvin Shakespeare held me and asked, "Do you believe me now?" I nodded, dazed. His actions made me believe one thing: he liked me too. He truly didn't hold a grudge against me. As the New Year bells rang, Alvin Shakespeare held me close and softly said, "Jill Croft, Happy New Year." I basked in that warm moment and bravely asked him, "Since you like me too, why didn't you take action the last time you came back from the bar?" In the darkness, Alvin Shakespeare's eyes sparkled. He was smiling. I wouldn't want to take advantage of someone in a vulnerable moment. Who was truly vulnerable here? And you wouldn't like me this way. I felt a bit shy looking at Alvin Shakespeare. Well, the last time could have flowed naturally, but I ended up scolding him and calling him a creep. The stumbling block on this love journey turned out to be none other than myself. I asked Alvin Shakespeare, "Weren't you scared of me back then?" Though I was reluctant to admit it, my title was indeed the ruthless old thief. Alvin Shakespeare remained silent for a long time on that question, so long that I felt a pang in my heart, until he suddenly smiled. "Why can everyone else have a crush on the instructor, but why can't I?" Touche. Well played, Alvin Shakespeare. Jill Croft. Yeah. Now that I'm done questioning, can I continue to kiss you? Go ahead. I won't stop you unless I say so. That night, Alvin Shakespeare stayed over at my place. I had a dream. Everyone, attention. I stood in front of a group of junior students, smiling radiantly. They were clearly shorter than me, but in terms of posture and pride, I was the best. In the crowd, there was an unbelievably handsome boy. At just one glance, I stumbled. The tall girl, step forward. This is the boys' class. Quickly, his roommate burst into laughter. Wow, Alvin Shakespeare. It seems she mistook you for a girl. Alvin Shakespeare remained silent, a sharp gaze fixed on me. I suddenly woke up. Opening my eyes, I saw Alvin Shakespeare's long hand gently resting above my head, protecting me in a loving embrace. In that moment, my heart felt sweet. Late at night, I suddenly remembered a very small thing. 2 days before military training ended, everyone claimed that I, Jill Croft, had a frightening reputation. Some even called me the devil instructor, never really seeing me as a girl. On that day, I secretly ran to the shade to claim a rare break area for them, even fetching the most sought-after mung bean soup on campus. I was happily waiting for those little brats to come, but then I overheard someone say, "Jill Croft is like a man, rude and fierce. No one would like her, right, guys?" Suddenly, I heard a voice. "I disagree. Instructor Jill Croft is tough but caring." In that moment, the bitterness in my heart faded away. At that time, the voice from my memory overlapped with Alvin Shakespeare's voice, and I finally realized. I looked up, and Alvin Shakespeare was smiling at me. "Awake now. Did you do the same hand, same foot thing on purpose back then?" I asked, and he smiled without answering. Whoa, turns out he had intentions for me back then, and tricked me into thinking he received special treatment. But I intentionally did the same hand, same foot thing so many times, and yet you still couldn't recall my name? If you liked me all along, why didn't you reach out to me after training? When military training ended, I heard a rule that instructors couldn't date students, and I didn't want to affect you. Half asleep, I seemed to hear Alvin Shakespeare say, "But I never gave up on you all these years. I knew that one day, I would wait for you." This story is now complete. Feel free to subscribe to the channel for the latest content, as many novels are updated daily.